Hey people. This one seems to encapsulate a lot of subjects that I have been thinking about recently, and what I'm about really, in the sense of my centrism. And as a centrist, I've always instinctively rejected extremes. Now, this video is what I regard as an extreme of the new left. Um, Just a disclaimer, I have criticised the right on numerous occasions, certainly on the issue of gun violence. I think American conservatives have their head in the sand on that issue. And there's a lot of other areas I would disagree with conservatives on quite strongly. But I shouldn't have to sort of prove that with every video, like have an exact balance overview, because each video is a different subject. In this video, I want to talk about the woke left. And I have mentioned it before, but it's one of the defining things of our age, the culture wars and everything that comes with that. And these issues have once again been reignited, of course, with the Roe v. Wade overturning, the 50th anniversary of Pride. Things like that have sort of ignited some of the issues around this. So, woke itself, recently there's been this interesting phenomenon whereby people who would have happily called themselves woke not so long ago, and in some cases still do, they now get very defensive when the term is used as a point of critique. And I'm not talking about necessarily defensive of the ideology, but they pretend that it doesn't even exist. So it goes something like this: oh, woke. People are woke now if they're compassionate. I'm thinking, well, wait a second. It's you that came up with the term. I mean, this term woke comes from being awoken to injustice. And it may go back as far as the 1930s, but was particularly galvanized, let's say, in the 1970s by African Americans as part of the wider Black Power movement. And then in the late 2010s, of course, it came up again. Ironically, it's been accused of cultural appropriation by white woke activists. I mean, this is just typical left on left infighting, but that's an important point. Woke is not some sort of invented term of disparity. It's an ideology, and just like any other ideology, whether it be socialism or conservatism or libertarianism or whatever, it's not above critique. So when people say that, right wingers use it as a point of insult, that's a bit like saying, well, socialist is a point of insult or conservative is a point of insult. That's why I think woke is different from something like snowflake, which is an insult. I mean, it's a bit childish. I don't use terms like that because I just think it's not particularly helpful. But woke is an ideology, right? So that's an important point to address. So what is my critique of wokeism? Primarily, it's the way that woke activists tend to weaponize identity politics. I think it's absolutely loathsome. Um, as an example, they will view the entire world through the prism of race, gender, sex, these things, demographics, basically. Now, if someone like me, a white cis male, has an opinion about something that doesn't conform to woke thinking, then they will immediately not attack my opinion. They will attack the fact that I'm a white cis male. Okay, so what they're really saying is your demographic is a fault in of itself. Imagine if that was a reversal. Imagine if I were to attack, let's say, a black lesbian woman instead of attacking her views. It's just ridiculous. Now, paradoxically, if a black lesbian woman was to agree with the white cis man on any given issue, she would be branded a traitor to the cause. Oh, she's not really an ally. Um, so what I find ironic about the woke movement, the woke ideology, is it's pleased to be all about compassion and empathy. Yet so often it endorses bullying tactics. I mean, they say that cancel culture is exaggerated, it doesn't exist. Well, let's look at that for a second. If people are saying they disagree with a speaker, that's not cancel culture. If people are peacefully protesting, that's not cancel culture. But where I would argue it crosses the line into cancel culture is when they actively try to destroy someone's career or get them deplatformed in the sense of demanding that they are just have no say whatsoever. Now that's crossing over from saying I dislike this person or their viewpoint to going into something else. Um, I mean, the other side of it, of course, is there will be networks who, for ratings, they will get a controversial person to speak. An example of this is Piers Morgan. I think, he's utilised because he's famous and he's got a big mouth, right? I agree with some of his points, but I also think Piers Morgan is a controversialist for the sake of it. I'm not sure how much conviction he has. Um, I think he's a bit of a contrarian just for the sake of it. But cancel culture, it does exist actually. J.K. Rowling is a good example of this. There have been active, concerted attempts to have her silenced, to have her deplatformed, to have her name blacklisted because of her views on the trans issue. The irony, of course, is J.K. Rowling's hardly a right winger. She is herself fairly woke in many ways. She's a feminist. She's not exactly the prototype of a reactionary right winger. So that's the irony about this: is this infighting among the left because people are not conforming to this. And I just think that so many of the things that they say that they're about, it's contradictory. You say you're against bullying, yet you bully. You say you're all for inclusivity, yet you don't believe in plurality of opinion. So, you say you're anti-racism, but you believe in crude generalizations of white people. That's fair game. I mean, that's one of the most obnoxious things in terms of the vernacular that they use. White privilege. I've spoken about it before. I think it's an odious, horrible term. Why? Because it's basically saying that, you could have, in theory, a white homeless guy or woman who has severe mental health problems, who may have been sexually abused as a child. There may be X, Y, and Z reasons why they're in the position they're in, but they're white. So they are therefore in the same camp as Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk because they're white. And it's all white privilege. Now, they deny it's a generalization, but it absolutely is a generalization because they don't differentiate. And I know this because I've been in rather testy exchanges about the term. Mansplaining is another one. It's a bit less inflammatory, but it would be like if a man disagrees with a woman, oh, well, he must be mansplaining. I mean, I think a real inherent danger of human psychology is when sensitivity is combined with intolerance. Those two things are a toxic mix. I mean, we see this with pan-Islamism, where you get Islamists who are hyper sensitive about their religion being offended. So they talk about hurt feelings and so on. Yeah, they're prepared to use violence and violent intimidation to make their point. So I think hypersensitivity and hurt feelings, hypersensitivity and hurt feelings, I should say, combined with intolerance and a preparedness to act on that, it's a toxic mix. And I also think we are seeing something of a diversity Olympics. What I mean by that is, well, an example would be the latest additions to the pride flag. Now, LGBT people, and particularly LGBT people, because the transgender issue it's a lot more complex, I would say. But let's say LGBT people have fought long and hard for basic rights. But now we're seeing a situation. The Mayor of London had it up the other day. I think it was very much virtue signaling, where the flag is getting increasingly complex. It's adding more colours and more shapes, and actually, for anyone suffering from epilepsy, I would imagine it's quite overwhelming. Um, and you might argue there's good intentions behind that, but I say there comes a point when arguing that there are 56 genders is just utter nonsense. I mean, even if there was, using 56 acronyms would just not be practical. It really wouldn't. It's like that village in Wales with, I think it actually has 56 letters, unless I'm mistaken, and no one says the full name of the place because it's pretty much impossible to pronounce, even I imagine for most Welsh people. And here's the problem with this sort of inclusivity Olympics. If you have, let's say, a pan-fluid person and a gender non-conforming person, who gets the priority on the flag? Okay, so then it becomes this battle of who gets the priority. And why is this person not included? That's why it gets absurd. Um, Good intentions or not, I think it's impractical. Um, I mean, LGBTQ plus questioning, I guess, is the Q, but acronyms are just ever increasing and it's getting ever more absurd. The first four, I would say, have a basis, but after that, I honestly think it is getting to the point where it is absurd. And here's the problem I have, and I was arguing this point the other day with a guy. I don't know how he described himself, if he was gay or transgender or what, but he was saying, "Oh, you're against inclusivity." No, what I'm against is this idea, for example, that a company, because they're not including all the acronyms, oh, they're lagging behind, so they mustn't be inclusive. That's the problem with it. So what Sadiq Khan is doing, and I think it is virtue signalling, I think it's a little bit manipulative, is look how righteous I am. And if you don't agree with this, then you must be a bigot. That's it's actually quite a clever move. And this is what woke activists do. They say, they're against racism, they're against sexism, misogyny, and so on. And in doing so, by extension, their critics must be for racism and sexism and misogyny. But now we're starting to see cracks. I mean, I think this issue between feminists and trans activists is a good example because there is actually very deep misogyny in some of the attitude to feminist women who take issue with the way the trans issue is going. Although there is some pushback, I mean, the decisions by FINA and other sports governing bodies is a welcome move. Although I would say although on this issue I'm sympathetic to feminists, I would say for years they've been collectively shaming men. So now they know what it's like to be on the side of getting, vilified. Um, I'm going to wrap this up soon, but I just think that if you're someone who sort of sees yourself as woke, that's fine, right? In of itself, it's fine. But if you're going to say that it's all about compassion and understanding and empathy, then at least call out woke activists who engage in bullying tactics and to throw around loaded terms like racism and sexism and so on. Just because someone doesn't see the world exactly as you do does not mean that you have a monopoly of righteousness. I mean, I'm someone with strong views on a lot of issues, but I hope I'm modest enough to accept that I don't know everything and that I'm learning things and that there's times I could do better. I hope I'm modest enough to accept that. But I refuse to be attacked for anything other than my opinion. I.e., if I was in a debate, and I haven't really been in this situation often, but I certainly know that public figures have who have taken on woke ideologues. If I'm in a position where someone starts talking about the fact I'm a man or white or straight, I'm going to switch it off. I'm going to say, well, there's no point of this, is there? We're not going to meet at a halfway point. If you're looking at me as the enemy from the start, we're not going to meet at a halfway point. It's that simple. So really, I just find, if not the individuals, certainly the movement and the ideology to be pretty unpleasant, very hypocritical, and just dishonest. I'm all for compassion, I'm all for inclusivity, I'm all for empathy. Those are important things. And I abhor bullying of any kind. But I refuse to pander to this intolerant and dishonest movement.